Excellent. So, Jen, I am so happy that you agreed to join for our quick little interview. Hopefully not so quick. But you and I have known each other for, I don't know, quite some time at this point, and I know that
four
you
years, I think. Huh?
yeah, you come at this from a unique perspective, both as being involved with NAWIC, which I'm sure we will talk about, and coming at things from the sort of workforce development pipeline perspective as well. Now, as president of the Maryland Center for Construction Education and Innovation, which is like
The
it's like a
worst
mouth
name ever.
it's like a mouthful.
It's terrible.
But
I know.
that's
We've
okay.
talked
And
about it.
and
Yeah.
and and I know that you guys are doing some really great work. So I appreciate you taking a little bit of time to start off with. Talk a little bit about how you personally got into construction in this crazy environment of both women in construction and sort of building the pipeline for the future.
So, like many women in the industry, I kind of fell into the construction industry. I went to college, thought I was going to be in advertising. I got a degree in communications with a specialization advertising and a minor in sociology. Couldn't find a job after school. I definitely didn't do the right things. I did an internship. I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. Like anybody in my family had not graduated from college yet. So nobody gave me advice on internships or anything like that. So I was really struggling when it came to finding a job after school, and I ended up doing marketing for Whiting Turner. And I remember in my interview being asked like, what I thought about the construction industry. And to be honest, before I answered that ad in the paper, because it was an ad in the paper, oh, I'm giving thumbs up now. I hadn't thought about the construction industry, but my thought was, well, I love the idea of creating things, and what is creating more than construction? And it was while I was in at Whiting Turner that I got exposed to the people that went to school for construction management and civil engineering. And I saw how much money these people were making that started the same time I did. And they were making probably double what I was making in communications for WT, and got the opportunity to go through project engineers training. And sitting in there, realized I actually understood what was happening. Now, I had been in the construction industry for 3 or 4 years at that point. Went through project engineers training and thought to myself in the back of my head, like I could do this. And it seems pretty cool. I left construction for a year, and when I was there, a friend of mine was at a smaller GC that had just started up. And he said to me, we have somebody who's project engineer and she doesn't have training. And I know you keep asking if we're hiring. Would you consider um, a project engineer role? And I was like, I I had thought about it, but I never thought that somebody would actually hire me to do this. So I ended up doing that. They hired me, and I was there for 8 years. During that time, transitioned back into a marketing role, but as a marketer that actually knew what she was talking about, because I had ran projects. I did a little bit of quality control, whatever. But during this time, we were challenged to join a board and to get involved. And that's how they wanted to develop their business as an owner. And I found NAWIC, and during that time, got heavily involved. I mean, immediately, I think I joined in March, and by May, I was on the board of directors of NAWIC chapter. And within 3 years, I was chapter president too. So at that time, once I became chapter president, I started meeting with people like BG, Baltimore Gas and Electric, who were like, we need more women, and we don't know how to find more women. And they were like, how can you help us find more women? And it was through those meetings that I realized I started thinking about my own career path and how I got there, and how, I was, a straight A student. completely capable of going to school for something like engineering or construction management or whatever, but I went to an all-girls Catholic high school. Nobody talked to me about those types of career paths. And I was like, how do I make sure that changes for young women and that they don't, like, I have two daughters. How do I make sure that they know what their career paths are beyond being a teacher or a nurse, which are all noble career paths, but honestly, they don't pay like male dominated positions do. And started our Camp Newick when I was chapter president, which is our middle school camp. And like through that, became friends with the Maryland Center for Construction Education and Innovation. Actually met them at the former president at a NAWIC event. I mean, like NAWIC literally shaped my career and got me to where I am and exposed me to opportunities. Obviously it's what you put into it. You can't just like become a NAWIC member and suddenly have a new job. But it like through everything, the people that I met with NAWIC, the ideas that I was exposed to made me realize like we are such a small percentage of the construction workforce, but we're over 50% of the population. And what do we have to do as an industry beyond like MCCEI is doing work, and there are other organizations across the country doing the same work, educating young women about the opportunities to them. That is a challenge, but also what does the industry have to do to make women want to stay once we get them here? So it's a huge, I don't think it's a one, I know I just went on a rant about the construction industry, but that's the passion that I was ignited with, about 13 years ago when I became a NAWIC member. And now I couldn't even imagine leaving this industry. I have a huge passion for young girls and young women, and actually even career changing women or stay-at-home moms that are trying to leave abusive husbands, and that like I just want every woman out there to realize that there are career paths that they think they can't do, but they absolutely can do, and they can be an independent person, not relying upon anybody while they're doing it.
So I want to poke at two things. One is, right, you are a tremendous advocate for NAWIC, and I'm sure that you are affiliated with other industry, associations as well.
Absolutely.
Whether that is
Yep.
right, CMAA, or right, there's a whole alphabet soup of
Yep.
associations. From your perspective, your personal experience and what you see from the organization, what's the value that women get or derive from being associated with NAWIC, which is, or like a, PWC, Professional Women in Construction, or whatever it may be, where it is specifically geared toward women in a significantly male populated industry?
Yeah. So I don't know if it was me, like the fact that I went to an all girls high school, right? And I just being around other women is incredibly empowering for me personally. And now, I mean, I have a staff full of women. I've only hired women, and as I hire consultants, I'm not on purpose hiring just women, but I just have been surrounded by really powerful women my entire like adult life now. And I think there's just something really special that happens when women empower other women. And we empower each other differently. Like I have amazing men in my life. I mean, you have been a huge supporter of me too, but like there's just something different. And I can't name it really, but there's just speak when women speak well of other women, I think it just creates this like magic. And when you support other women, it creates magic. And I think there's a little bit difference. Like men, I think, do the same for each other. Like there's this sponsorship part, like a woman sponsoring another woman and speaking up for her and vouching for her and saying like you should give this person a try. And I think men do that naturally for each other, but I don't know that it happens a whole lot men to women. And I believe the stats say it doesn't happen a whole lot, men to women. And I don't think it's, again, anybody intentionally trying to like cut women out of the equation. It's just like biology and unconscious biases and all that. So I think when you get an organization like Women that's run 100% by women, there's ego is out the window, usually. There's still sometimes, obviously, personalities and everything like that.
Hopefully.
Yeah. All right, my allergies are out of control. Oh,
Bless you.
and thank you. And I think the cool part about NEWIC is that even though it's been around for like, I think we're coming close to 70 years, it still feels like a place you can make your mark, right? A lot of these other organizations are so big, like ABC or AGC or CMAA. They're just these massive behemoth organizations that are like run on their own, right? And everything, they've got paid employees, even at the chapter level, and like NAWIC doesn't have that, right? So you get to experience like running a business as a volunteer. And I say like it's almost like a safe place to fail, because I was able to try out things as a NAWIC member. Like I was on the national board of NAWIC and I helped write strategic plans and hire marketing people and look over the website and everything, which was not something that I was necessarily at that point in my career given the chance in my day-to-day life. And granted, not everybody gets to be on the national board of NAWIC, but if you put in, I mean, you put in the work and you show that you have a passion for it, they want you on the national board. And I don't know that, again, that that's the exact same thing in other organizations. The path, I don't know, I saw a clear path to success. Like I chose not to run for an officer position, but I just got a call the other day asking me if I would do it, right? So I know it's still there if I want it. And I don't know it's as easy. And I'm saying it's easy, but like it's just, you're not fighting against as much, I think. And like my experience in NEWIC has helped me in my experiences in my jobs, right? I was able to say, oh yeah, well, I might not have ever run a company before, but I, oversaw 13 chapters from Maine to DC. And I represent, like, I was able to say that stuff. And I just, there's
transferable skills.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
I just don't know that the exact same thing happens. Plus, we all have the same perspective. Like, no matter in NAWIC, even though everybody has, you could be, an admin person or running your own company, you're all equal in the eyes of NAWIC. And there's that perspective. We all still face the same walking onto a job site, no matter what role we have.
Right.
We're all treated the same way by men when we walk onto that job site, no matter if we own the company or all we're doing is selling some equipment to somebody on the job site, right? When I think that unifying perspective of being like in the trenches together, just kind of gives us like, camaraderie amongst us that doesn't exist in a mixed company group.
Sure. Now you talk about the sponsorship piece, which I think is very important towards, for women to be successful within, whether it's private side, right, working for contractors, working for engineering firms, or on the client side, working for a DOT or, right, whatever the agency might be. And you talk about right, there is that sort of disparity, the challenge of like, men tend to sponsor and pull their colleagues along, and promote them and push them into higher positions. Less so for men doing that for women.
Right.
Talk a little bit about the women doing it for women, because I know that within organizations that can often be as much of a challenge, right? The women tend to be, a very small, sort of cadre within the organization, and from my perspective, it is often difficult for, if you have starting to rise to that executive level, to pull women with you along the way as you rise.
Can be. And I do think that maybe the older, like a baby boomer generation of women probably didn't pull other women. I think I noticed from working with women of baby boomer eras, they saw other women as competition, not necessarily as somebody they should be helping along, because they had to and because they had to fight tooth and nail to get where they were, they often, and I'm not all baby boomer women, but a good majority of baby boomer women see other women as competition and don't help them. But I have worked with women who were, the only female voice in a leadership meeting, and they've actually, like, they would, even though I did not report to them in any way, shape, or form, they would pull me in to have one-on-ones to talk to me and say, hey, like, I'm in a meeting and I'll hear where they're talking about, who's up for review. And a woman will be called, difficult or whatever, when she's no different than the man next to her doing the exact same thing. And she will, it takes a strong woman to do that in a room full of men. But that was somebody who had earned respect over the years of being there for a long time. And I think that's incredibly important. I mean, and people may not realize that that's sponsorship, but it is. I mean, that's making sure that woman is putting her neck on the line for that other woman in a room in which she could upset people. But I think it's important for anybody when you're in a position of power to realize the privilege that you have and to use it for good. And I'm grateful to have worked with women like that. And again, I've worked with men that have done the same thing. And honestly, like one of my biggest mentors in my career was a Black man. And I think that was part of is that he had he didn't have the exact same perspective as me, but he had a similar one, right? In that he knew he had a little bit extra to fight to get his voice heard. And he said the same thing to me. Like when I took this job over, he was like, you're going to have to be perfect in everything that you do, because what you're doing is going to be scrutinized more than a man that was in the same job as you. So,
well, and it's, and as you know, I go to the NAWIC annual conference, and I made some comment, I think in my workshop last time about women, right? It's the Ginger Rogers analogy, right? Everyone always praised Fred Astaire for being such a great dancer, and Ginger Rogers basically said, I have to do everything he does, except I have to do it backwards and in the heels.
Heels, yeah.
Right. And still, right, that mentality still is pervasive within the construction industry. Women have to do it just as well, but they've got to do it backwards and in the heels, so to speak.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. There was research that came out of the University of Maryland, several papers, but the same thing. Like they looked at LinkedIn and used AI to see how many jobs a woman had to have and how many career changes she had and how many degrees she had to have. And it's like so many more than the male counterparts to get to the same spot. You have to move jobs so up because you just hit a ceiling, hit a ceiling, hit a ceiling. And then just the advanced degrees and certifications and all that. I remember when I was, in project management, I was the first project engineer to get their LEED accredited, LEED AP, whereas I was the only female engineer, right? Everyone else was a man. And I was the only one without a degree in construction, but I was the first one to get it because I had to, right? I was also 8 months pregnant when I passed that exam too.
So I want to tap into the other part that you mentioned, which is your, you came into it from an advertising perspective. So I'm going to ask you to put your little bit of an I know you're not doing advertising anymore, but put a little bit of an advertising spin on it in terms of both the work you're doing now in terms of creating the pipeline for not just women, but a younger generation to come into construction.
Exactly.
As well as what do we need to do from a image perspective to both attract younger generation and more specifically a younger generation of women, because you mentioned you have two daughters. Your daughters are high school and middle school, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Hmm.
In their school, is construction even presented as a career path at this point?
In the high school, yes, because we're in a pretty rural area that has like a strong ag tech. In fact, I was actually at the high school career fair on behalf of MCCEI, and my daughter's a ninth grader, and I texted her in class, and I was like, she was going with her Avid class, which is like a group that helps kids like for college, and there were a decent number of construction based things, and I was like, bring your people, because we have a guidebook. It's an old version of the guidebook, but it basically has like all the different career paths that they could have. Like it says if you want to be a carpenter, how much money to expect to make, whatever. And I have like, so basically we had a whole bunch of the new versions of our guidebook there. And we had just had all these kids coming over and they're like, this is so helpful. Like this book telling me about it was very helpful. So yes, I think that is a huge thing, just exposing kids to the idea that construction isn't what you think it is. You think, I mean, the general public thinks construction is road work or people working on your house, right? Like they don't realize, yeah, they see cranes going up, they see that there's a stadium being built, but they have no idea. Even my own friends who have known that I'm this passionate person are like, oh, I was talking about, I always laugh every time it comes up. Like I share something on Facebook around this time every year that says like how much money childcare workers make and teachers versus like a plumber or whatever. And it's very low. And I had this one friend in the comments like, oh yeah, but HVAC, they're just like stuck in people's attics and it's miserable and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, yes, there are people in HVAC that's their career choice, but
Yep.
they're not making the money that a commercial or an industrial HVAC tech is making. And the work conditions that a new build versus that is like 180. Like,
Yeah.
and what you're imagining is your friend that does residential, and that so residential is incredibly important, but it is not the only perspective, and that's all that we're teaching in high school even, is residential construction,
Yep.
because it's easy, like it's cheaper to buy wood than metal studs, and it's cheaper to use PVC than copper, like it's just cheaper, so that's why
Mhm.
it's being taught. And it's because you're trying to, dumb it down for kids, but that's not the exciting part of construction. Building Raven Stadium is exciting. Building an exhibit at the zoo, building a hospital, that's the cool
Yep.
stuff. And I think that's what we need to be selling to our young people. We've been trying to create a video series that has been very difficult to get our sponsors to like buy into, is the making a difference part. For so long, construction professionals have been like the pride of seeing that I built whatever, and I drive past and I say to my family like, I built that, right? Okay, fine, that's the baby boomer pride. Gen Z, yeah, there's pride, but they care about the difference they're making in their life and they want work-life balance. And Gen Z, they don't even necessarily want a full career anymore. They want to like cobble together like four side gigs or hustles to make a living, because they
Yeah.
don't want to be. And I think construction can be part of that. Like if you think about a skilled tradesperson, like the idea that you can travel the world can be enticing. We're just not selling it right. Like Gen Z, I think, is built for the construction industry, but we as an industry haven't decided yet how the fact that you could be off work by 3 p.m. working in construction, like those are things that we're not doing a good job selling. Yes, there's sometimes long day hours, and yes, there's crazy, but like that's part of like Gen Z doesn't want a regular 9 to 5.
Yeah.
And I think that's like what we need to be selling, that part of it too.
And I think that we probably haven't done a good job of, so like with Gen Z, where they are very much in a generalized way,
Mhm.
because my kids just graduated from college, so they are squarely Gen Z,
Yes.
and my son's working full time in an organization, and my daughter is off doing her own thing. So it's like, so I get both perspectives.
Yep.
But Gen Z, which is probably much more purpose driven
Yes.
than we were,
Yes.
as as Gen X, right? So
Mhm.
we are, but we haven't even been able to make the case for Gen Z that the things that they're interested on in the issues that they are interested in are very much impacted by construction.
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
the Gen Z folks who are so passionate about climate change, you know, the infrastructure bill that we passed, whatever is last year, a huge percentage of it is just climate change work, right?
Yep.
Whether it is charging stations for electric vehicles, whether it is, renewable energies, whether, right there, that's all construction. We don't think of it. We haven't made that connection. We haven't closed the synapse
Yep.
for that generation, that all those things that they're concerned about, there is some connection to what we do in the construction industry.
Absolutely. I mean, what babies wouldn't be born in hospitals if it wasn't for construction workers. We wouldn't be on this Zoom call right now if it wasn't for construction workers. And I think that's um, a huge message that's missing. This whole, like, the fact that you can make a difference in these industries without having to be in a volunteer or nonprofit world, right? You can be making a difference and making a really good paycheck while you're doing it. And that's one thing I think. And then honestly, the industry has a terrible image problem. We have our symposium coming up, literally called Image of the Industry, because some of it is stereotype, right? The idea of, the plumber with the butt crack hanging out and the, cat calling on job sites. Some of it is stereotype, but some of it's reality. And as an industry, we need to do a major change to make our workforce look as diverse as the population, because right now it does not
Yeah.
at all.
So when you start to think about, I'm going to go to what happens on the job site, right? Which is, there's some stuff which is stereotypical, and some stuff which is, it's real. The I can recall. I'm not so old that I can't recall that, foremen and superintendents on job sites used to be, their communications were generally described in terms of how loud they yelled and how many four-letter words they used in a sentence. Uh, Hopefully, some of that is changing a little bit. But how do we start to create, or what can we do to be more engaging of women who are in the industry?
Yeah.
And how do we start to change that that perception that it's not the stereotype. The stereotype has some kernels of truth to it, but how do we start to engage
Yeah.
women in a different way?
I think we need to be intentional in our efforts to retain and promote the women that are in the industry. No longer just say, oh, the best person for the job gets this, because our idea of who the best person for the job is determined by the last 10 people that held that job. And if that person that always had that job was a man who maybe worked his way up through the trades, the idea of a woman who has never been in the trades before, but has all of the qualifications necessary, like the idea that you have to fight a lot of internal biases to hire that woman or to promote that woman into that position. So I think companies, like, I know a lot of the really big GCs have intentional goals on increasing the diversity of their mid-level managers as well as C-suite. And I think that's admirable. It is not a quota system. It's just trying to, like, right 200 years of women and minorities not being treated similarly. I mean, you think about it, women have only been in the workforce about 50 years, right? So maybe a little longer. My math's off when it comes to how old I am. The 1990s was just 10 years ago. But I think when you think about that, like we've caught up pretty quickly, but I think I saw something that gender pay gap wouldn't go away for another like 200 years if we go at the rate in which we're going. So I do think we need to be intentional about it. I think that's where we, do things like permit like the sponsorship versus mentorship training that ambition theory does, like those types of things where you really have to try. Um, and then I think once you've got women in leadership roles, culture starts to, like, if you let them be leaders the way they lead. Women lead differently than men on the whole. Again, that's a stereotype, but I mean,
That's all right.
women are often like transformational leaders as opposed to transactional. We help guide towards a goal rather than just like the milestones or whatever. Or they're also, I think, have like a lot of them have like servant leadership roles as well, where they are caring about the person. And I feel like I'm a mix of the two, of a servant leader versus transformational. I have a lot of goals that I'm inspiring my team towards, but I also care about their individual personal development. And if their individual person development is not to be with me forever, well, how do I make you reach those goals? And I think that's a very different, like when you talk about a man who's screaming to get work done, right?
Mhm.
When I ran projects, I was like good cop to my screaming project managers, bad cop. And I would say, like, look, you can either do it like I asked you to do it, without giving me a fight, or you're gonna have to deal with the asshole that's on the other end of the trailer, right?
Mhm.
So, which was ridiculous. I had to do that. I was providing a reasonable solution to things. And I think the more we accept that type of management and leadership, it'll make the industry so much better than this confrontational. I mean, our suicide rates are the highest of any industry out there. Our opioid rates are the highest of any industry out there. Something has got to change because we're not only negatively affecting the women, but with the men too. And
Yeah.
I'm sure it's the toxic masculinity that a typical construction job site is not a safe place emotionally or mentally to be. So, or physically,
Yeah.
honestly. Um, you're pushing people, not letting them heal in any way, shape, or form. And I think I've heard from contractors and I've heard from women apprentices who have said that their coworkers have said, like, having them on the job site, it's cleaner, it's safer, it's a happier, less yelling place. And I mean, every business is like that. Once you bring women in, it just softens men, and it's just lots less confrontational. And there's no reason why a contractor shouldn't want more women on the job site. Not even to mention the fact that we are at historic lows of men even participating in the workforce. We have
Oh,
historic lows
the
of that.
what you see it from the lens of uh, the work you're doing with MCCEI, in terms of the pipeline, right? So the number of young men who are going to college, the number of young men who are participating in the workforce in a full way. The there is a neuroscience perspective to it. Young men mature at an older age than women do. So my son's 23. I still tease him that he's still got another couple of years before his brain hardens. Um, you know, so you get young men coming into an industry, and they're not mature. They don't think of the right. They think intent. They don't think impact.
Yep.
Um, and women or any minority population is not. They don't care about intent. They care about impact. So I didn't mean to offend you. It doesn't matter if you meant to offend me. You did offend me, and recognize it and sort of clean it up. So we haven't done a great job of that. But you talk about, in terms of organizations and women who start to get promoted, and then there's the opportunity. And some of it is formalized sort of DEI initiatives. Where have you where have you seen sort of the backlash to that, where women get promoted, they're qualified, they can do the job, they are, right, they've got all the credentials, but yet they're still seen as less than because someone says, oh, we had to hire some women. So there's the bias or the assumption that they're less than. And then you talk about the pay gap. Women are still not getting paid the same for the same job and the same credentials.
Yeah. I mean, I have my own personal experience with that. Um, I had been at a firm for a very long time, and I won't say how long because it might, if this ends up anywhere, it could end up, people could look at my LinkedIn and see what firm I'm talking about. But I had been there for a while, and found out when one of my colleagues who had only been there a year or two and she was right out of school was making the same amount of money I had been making after being there for a very long time. And I was like, man, I was already thinking about leaving, but this just solidified me. Like, I'm not being valued here. So I ended up getting a 40% raise to my next job. And when I told them and I gave them my exit interview, which was very informal, they were like, wow, like they couldn't believe how much more I was getting paid. And I was like, look, this has been a great place to work. The culture is great, but I was like, I gotta pay my bills. I got two little kids. We're paycheck to paycheck. And they said, well, your husband's got a great job. We don't understand. And I was like, huh, all right. Well, the fact that I'm a married woman and my husband's got a great job, now ex-husband, now I see why I wasn't getting paid what I was getting paid. Not because of what my worth was, but because you figured you could get away with it because I don't need to be the breadwinner. My husband is, which is wild.
Yeah.
Absolutely wild. I am only
And
44 years
this
old.
is not the 1950s.
No,
Right.
it's absolutely insane that I was being
And
treated. And I guarantee that that happens everywhere.
yeah, probably still happening everywhere,
Yes.
lots of places. And how much of that was a function of advocacy, and how much of that was a function of the natural sort of bias that you're talking about in terms of like, oh, her husband makes a good living, right? We can get away with paying less.
I think a little bit of self-advocacy. The stuff at that job, I was asked things in interviews like or in my reviews how much longer I was going to breastfeed for because it was my second kid and it was taken away from my duties. When I got pregnant, they were asking if I was going to go part-time, like just a lot of really wild stuff happening there. So I think it was part of that. Plus I was young, right? I didn't have the voice that I have now. I shouldn't have had to. I shouldn't have had to face these like microaggressions about being a woman and a mother I was facing literally every day at work. But I think part of it was I remember telling my mom that I got a job offer and she's like, that's great. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna ask for more. And she's like, oh, why would you do that? That's more the money than you were making before. And I was like, because you're supposed to. You're supposed to, like they expect you to.
Yeah,
But that's who I was raised. Like women weren't raised to ask, weren't raised to ask for more. You took what you were given and you're polite and talking about money was impolite, and you wanted to be a nice girl. And I think that's the double bind that women face about, being nice, with that, but also being, you know, assertive without being aggressive, being, all those things. And it's very hard. Um, I think I've mastered that now. Um, Without being labeled the dreaded B word, I can, be forceful about things. But I wasn't when I was that young, like I didn't know how to do that.
yeah,
And I also think I just didn't have the confidence. Because I just internalized what was around me. You don't
yeah,
have a degree in construction, so you don't have as much value. And I just kept thinking that when in reality, as my career expanded, there's a person who is the president of a local construction firm here in Baltimore who has an education degree, right? He's a man who's like, I met him not shortly after leaving that last firm, and I was like, holy crap, you're running all the, and you don't have a degree. You have a degree, like
Yep.
I do, but not in construction. And it's one of those, like, I started realizing the more and more people I met that are in this industry that do not have degrees about civil engineering or whatever, they just, so,
So some of them don't have degrees, period.
well, that too. Well,
So,
that too.
so,
Yeah. Yes.
so I was having a conversation this morning about, now you're in Maryland. I was having a conversation about your governor
Uh-huh.
and his political future. I happen to be a big fan of his. I think that he's got a great perspective on this whole dynamic around workforce development, and I know he's a big advocate for a lot of the work you're doing.
Yes.
And the person said to me, "Do you think the country is ready for a president, assuming that he has presidential aspirations? Do you think that the country is ready for a president who doesn't have a college degree?" And I said, that in huge parts of this country, that would be normal, right? The normal idea that, like, you could run a business without having a college degree. You could be successful without having a college degree. I worked for a utility in New York, and one of the people I worked with, he graduated high school. 2 weeks later, was working for the gas company. 40 years later, he was still working for the same, had changed a few times with mergers and acquisitions and all kinds of other stuff, but still working for the same organization 40 years later. He
Yeah.
had forgotten more about the industry than we would ever know. And you weren't going to get anything past him, right? He saw every single angle, right? We were working in construction. Contractors, who are good contractors, they don't have many of them don't have college degrees, but they figure out every single which way to get things done without necessarily having a college degree. So, right. So going back a little bit to the perspective that you're bringing in terms of building the workforce, how do we start to change the mentality that the career path has to go through a 4-year college, right? That in order to be
Yeah.
successful, right?
I mean, I think it's beyond just the work. I mean, it's the work I'm literally doing right now. We have a huge grant with MSDE, the Maryland State Department of Education, to create high school level apprenticeships. So my current role is, and my current directive is to get existing construction companies that have apprenticeships that start when you graduate from high school to adopt them when they are still in high school. And we felt like we filled the like everyone says you have to be 18 to work in construction. It's actually not true. And at least in the state of Maryland, workers' compensation rates are not affected by the age of the person that you hire. Even if there is a claim, the age of the person is not doesn't affect. And in Maryland, we're kind of lucky in that the you can act age discrimination can actually be in effect for people under 40. Federally, it does not, but somebody could actually sue an employer in Maryland for saying you had to be over 18 to work there, unless it's there's a very small number of jobs that you legally have to be over 18 to job, like like having a CDL, you have to be 18 to have that. So our job is to not only convince construction companies to start in there, but I also want to convince construction managers to utilize apprenticeship. We created this system in the last 40 years in America in which we told every student the only way you can get a good job was by going to college. It was A Nation at Risk was the report that came out under the Reagan administration that said we were losing to all these European and Asian countries, and if we didn't do something, we were going to fall behind. But I think we overcorrected by saying everyone had to go to college. Only 25% of Marylanders actually have a college degree 5 years after they get out of high school. Obviously, college for all is not working. Even though we have actually a higher than average, I think 60% of Marylanders have a college degree, and it's skewed because of the amount of Washington folks that live in Maryland.
Sure.
we still, like, 40% of our population that doesn't have a degree. So when you've told kids the only pathway to success is through college, and men don't do as well in college or in school as girls do, now you're telling a fish the only way to succeed is to climb that tree, right? So I understand why they're not part of the why they are opting out of participating in the workforce.
Yeah,
But so I think there's a huge culture change that needs to happen, that needs to be driven by business. Like here in Maryland, legislation says that by 2030, 45% of high schoolers must have completed an industry recognized credential or a youth apprenticeship. Um, there's 58,000 kids that graduate a year in Maryland. So that is almost half of those students. We want to have apprenticeships. Industry recognized credentials was like they let that go through because the education industry is like, how the hell are we going to get, 30,000 kids a year in a youth apprenticeship? That's going to have to be like 90,000 employers. Like every employer in the state of Maryland is going to have to hire an apprentice in order to get to this stats. But like, when for the last 40 years, because we had this education machine that we needed to fill, we started adding college degree requirements to jobs that didn't need college degrees, like construction.
yeah,
And suddenly now we have construction management professionals that have to, and we sold owners on needing engineering degrees to run a project. Really, in order to run a project, you need to read how to read blueprints and talk to people, right?
yeah,
I mean, to be a construction manager, you don't really have to know how to build anything. You just need to have to know who to talk. In reality, yes, you can be taught things, whatever. And when I talk to contractors and I say, hey, we're building this curriculum in high school, what would you like your kids to know? Well, we can teach them what they need to know when they're here. We just need somebody with passion and a drive to work and that loves construction. Again, you just told me you don't need somebody with a college degree to do this. You just told me you can teach them on the job. So
right.
we've created this monster that we can't feed. I think we get less than 100 construction management majors every 4 years in Maryland. Whiting Turner is 150 interns a summer
Yeah.
in their Baltimore office. We're
And
just not making enough.
yeah, and there's an interesting perspective that you're talking about in terms of that pivot point, right? In the 80s, when we started to direct, everyone had to go to college. And if you graphed it, right, there's probably the drop off in union affiliation, right, probably starts at exactly that same pivot point. And the unions, now Maryland is a union state. I, was in New York. New York is a union state. The unions were always the driver of the apprentice programs, right? So if you were a kid who wanted to go become an electrician, you went into the apprentice program at local 3, and then right, and whatever it was, 7 years later you were a master electrician, and and that was the path. So we haven't done a great job in terms, right, that pivot point is going to take a long time to return. And if you bring it now full circle 40 years later, and all the discussion around the cost of colleges, the student loan issues, right, everything else, you can trace that all probably back to that same, right, I haven't done the research. I'm making a gross generalization, but I suspect I'm probably not far off. That you can trace much of what we're dealing with now in terms of the cost of higher education back to that point where everyone said, "Oh, you got to get a 4-year college degree," and then all of a sudden it became monumentally expensive, right?
Yeah, I'll
But I,
send I'll send an article with you that was recently in Fortune that talks about like how, so I'm part of the it's Harbor Freight Leadership Lab. It's funded. It's a part of their Tools for Schools program, and the facilitators of it is Bendable Labs, and the founder of Bendable Labs, Rick Wartzman, wrote the article. And we got to meet with him before it was published and talking about his research and his study, like calling up the US Department of Education to figure out how much is spent each year in CTE. They had no idea. So they figured out based on some funny numbers that they have a conservative estimate that 3% of the education funding every year in America is spent on CTE programming, career and technical education. 3%, right? And I think he looked back, like he went back even well beyond the 80s to look and see like how much money, and there were suggestions. I think the president of Harvard back in like the 1920s was suggesting skilled trades education. Like here it is, one of the most preeminent four-year institution in the United States was promoting the skilled trades as a meaningful pathway, but we just went 180 less than 100 years later, probably 50 years later, right?
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. And I don't think I'm in an interesting position in that we're funded by the Department of Education, so we have to be careful, but it's not like their fault, right? Like it's not our current education system's fault. They were given a directive 40 years ago and operating under the assumption that they were doing the best thing for our youth.
Yep.
And it was not, right? And I think we're starting, like, they're coming around because they have to here in Maryland because there's legislation forcing them to. But we are training our youth to become students. That's what we're training them for, not to become
Productive.
in
Yeah.
anything. Right? We're training them to become students.
And I think that, you know, there's a component of this, which is our education system in general is still set up to based on the late 1800s of, right, the kids can't go to school in the summer because you needed the kids on the farm.
Yeah.
Right. So
I am in a rural area with lots of farmers, so
yeah, I am not denigrating farmers,
yes.
but you know, it's like in the same way that, you know,
but their kids aren't working on the farm in the summer.
most construction companies are not big businesses, right? We started talking about this a little bit offline in terms of small businesses, right? The vast majority of contractors, trade contractors, construction companies are small businesses. We'll call it under 100 employees, probably even, you know, under 50 employees. And same thing with agriculture. The concept of the family farm is very different than it was 75 years ago. It's very much agribusiness now. You got probably about 5% of farms which are family owned, but we still have an education system which is we're going to start at 8. We're going to go 8 to 3, 5 days a week, right? It doesn't. We haven't brought the education system into the sort of 21st century to right size our education based on what we need what the needs are going to be when the students graduate.
Yep. Yeah. I don't know. It's the more I dig deep into our education system and the work that needs to be done, it seems like a daunting, overwhelming task that is never going to be fixed in my lifetime. But in a very short amount of time, I've seen the conversations change about skilled trades education. I've seen, and I think we're a nation that is excited about the idea of not having to be beholden to school loans.
Sure.
Better for worse. Higher educated people seem to be vilified a little bit in America right now. So perhaps this is our time to like, you know, strike while the iron's hot kind of thing and get kids interested. But I do think a lot of it has to do with just changing the narrative of what businesses and parents think about their kids. I mean, not until too long ago, you would ask a construction worker what they wanted for their kids, and it was never to be in the construction industry, right? I think that might be changing a little bit now, but everyone wants better for their kids, but you don't realize that like it's pretty hard. I mean, it's pretty hard to make six figures 5 years out of school in
Yeah.
any industry but construction.
And
Um,
and I think that when we talk about working on a job site, right, doing the physical labor associated with it, with the skilled trades, that's only a certain portion of the industry, right? We don't talk about the management. We don't talk about the all the other, sort of support and professional elements of the industry, which go beyond the carpenters and the masons and the
Absolutely.
electricians.
Yes. Yep.
But here's and I want to be respectful of your time, and a couple of more questions. Beyond the skilled traits, right?
Mhm.
Beyond what we need the next generation to know and be able to do, from a technical perspective. What's the what's the skill set that we're missing in the industry? Whether that is um, for women in the industry, right? Because I think this is sort of universal. What are those skills that we're sort of missing out on that are um, that we need the next generation to have in order for them to be successful within the industry?
So I would think the industry is missing out on people that know how to collaborate truly. And I see um back when I was still at Barton Mallow, they were really starting to dip their toes into like IPD, and the idea of like having like a big room where all the contractors had offices and like they had a team health captain like who would do, and like those projects just made more money and had great results in those. And I think if the industry went that way, like women thrive in those kinds of situations, like in collaboration and not like like the whole like lump sum bid with GCs and everything. It's just not it's not a good atmosphere to live in, right? So I think if the industry like embraced women and embraced the idea of having women in their ranks more, I think that's something that Gen Z could like bring, especially women, to the equation.
Yeah. All right. And because from my perspective, and I've been in the industry for a long time, and I've been on both sides of the hiring, of the desk in terms of hiring. There's an element, and you can tell me if you've seen this as well. There's an element of women, um, much more highly refined communication skills,
Hmm.
um, much more that they've got some challenges from a and we touched on it in terms of being willing to advocate for themselves, right? But um, nego- they can negotiate. They just can't. They don't negotiate for themselves, right?
Right. Yeah.
If you put them in front of a client to negotiate change orders or a project or whatever it is, they do just fine, right?
Yeah.
They have the skills. They just don't negotiate on their own behalf.
Right.
But in many cases, much more highly refined communication skills, much more empathy, much more willingness to see things from different perspectives, try new things, not necessarily bought into we've got to maintain the status quo.
Absolutely. And I think that's one thing. Every time I'm in a meeting, and I would say like you're the only man that I know of that's like thinking this way. Like every time I'm in a meeting where people are talking about like change that has to happen to the industry, it's very rarely a white man that's having that conversation. Very rarely having that conversation. And it's always women and minorities. And because to be honest, I mean, the construction industry has been great for white men, right? For the last
Still
century,
is, still
right?
is.
Right? So what needs to be changed, right? So when you're a woman or a minority, then it hasn't necessarily been great. You know, it's like, well, you know, and also you come in with a different perspective, especially as somebody who's like maybe a career changer who's coming into the industry and be like, oh, well, we did it this way somewhere else, or why aren't you thinking? You just have, I think that's one of the things, diversity of thought is incredibly important. When I was at Barton Mallow, we read the Sean Acor book, Big Potential, that talked about that. He talked about not always hiring the smartest person, because then you have a whole bunch of a team of everyone that thinks the same way. Like everyone has the same, if you come in with people with differing perspectives and differing backgrounds and all that, will brings diversity of thought and makes, you know, that innovation possible, that I think is incredibly necessary for the construction industry to survive. Because right now, I think I read yesterday a stat that said by 2037, 57% of our workforce will have retired. Our current
Yeah, I
workforce.
think yeah, within like the next, I think 8 years, huge tranche of folks in construction are going to be essentially retirement eligible because they will hit 65 or 66,
Yeah,
whatever their retirement age is.
2030, the last baby boomers turn 65.
Yep.
But then Gen Z is quickly behind them. By 2037, there's a whole bunch. They're expecting a lot of Gen Z to retire early,
Yep.
or just tap out in general. But yeah.
So in the DEI gets a little bit of a black eye right now, right? It's
Yep.
a and I think that, and from my perspective, I think when we talk about diversity, we are talking about it too narrowly, right? And generally in the public square, when you talk about diversity, it's generally around race and gender.
Yep.
And what you touched upon is I think the missing element, which is diversity of thought, diversity of background, diversity of experience, diversity of geographic diversity, because that's the part that makes teams work.
Racial diversity, all of that. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So, when we start to think about how we're putting a team together, right, we want there to be some ability to challenge without necessarily being challenging. And the missing element in that is the psychological safety that a minority population, whether it's women or minorities in an organization, the ability for them to speak up.
Right.
So as we're coming to the end, what is it that men need to know in order to be more open to that kind of, or creating that safe space for there to be open conversation without it being seen as, maybe solicitous or simplistic?
Yeah, I mean, I think just acknowledge that literally every human being in the world has biases, right? And they were an evolutionary, they kept us alive from the saber-toothed tigers, right? Like that's how long we've had biases, is knowing if something is a threat or whatever. I mean, so just the idea that you might possibly be treating someone differently without intentionally doing it, and like just being open to that idea. And I think the moment that you're open to the idea that maybe you aren't as like equal in treatment of people or as equitable, that just having the idea, just not being afraid to think that you're being blamed. And I think that's a big part, like on women and minorities, is not come out with like guns ablazing and saying, the man has like held me down for, the last 2 centuries and now you owe us. Like that's where you come at it with like a confrontational, combative victim versus offender.
Yep.
The majority of men, yes, benefit from a patriarchal system that they didn't create, right? Like they didn't create this. I mean, it extends even beyond the creation of this nation, right? I mean, it's just history, right?
Yeah.
So they're not to blame, right? Men are not to blame for the way things are today, and women aren't either. Women are just as often guilty of like maintaining stereotypes and misogyny against other women. Like, I mean, that's women oftentimes treat women differently than they do men and hold women against higher. I mean, I see it. I'm in divorce groups. I see like, oh, he's a man, like he like whatever, like what do you expect? But if a woman did the same thing, oh my God, right? So I think
Right.
we do it ourselves, that we let some people off the hook and others not. Just and I think we have to have that perspective that maybe we are treating women differently, and just be open to the idea that we aren't, we know you're not doing it on purpose. None of us are doing it. Most of us aren't doing it on purpose.
Right.
And then be open to the suggestions that somebody has on how to write it. And it is not about quotas, and it's not about trying to give somebody a leg up. It's about trying to level the playing field a little bit so that somebody has the same opportunities that you really say. You said everyone has the same opportunity because you're not putting a gender on this role, but you are unconsciously putting a gender on roles oftentimes, by the way you label the job descriptions and I don't know. I know that there's HR software out there that can help like eradicate some of that. But you can't
As soon
use
as you, as soon,
technology to
right,
get rid of.
right, as soon as you insert human beings, you're going to get
Yes,
the natural biases. And
exactly.
I have hope for the next generation that
Yep,
there is some greater awareness, right? In
absolutely.
the same way it took 40 years for us to get to this point of, the college is the only career path. It may take another 40 years before you start to see that sort of equitable nature start to really come into play. Last question for you. What is the one piece of advice you wish you had gotten early on in your career that you know now?
Oh gosh. I honestly think it's just like stop doubting yourself, right? And just go for it. I think a lot of women suffer from what they call like imposter syndrome. I don't know that it's necessary that. I think its reality is that we're being um, judged against standards that weren't built for us, right? And I think just because your way of leading is different than the person next to you's way of leading doesn't mean that you're not just as effective. And like own it. And I think I listened to too many naysayers when I was younger, and I kind of let it get to my self-confidence, and I think it held me back. I mean, I eventually got here, but it took a while, and it took finding the right surrounding myself with the right people. And I think that's also important too, is like where you focus is where it flows, right? So surround yourself with smart people, surround yourself with like-minded people, with good, positive people, and um the rest will make it. I mean, I just sometimes feel like I just happen across like coincidences and things, but I mean, it's because of what I'm doing that I'm meeting awesome people, and then finding like I keep in my work every day, I find or other organizations doing the same stuff, and I'm like, I feel like these kindred spirits, and it's like seems like an accident, but it's not an accident. It's because of what I'm doing and who I'm surrounding myself with. And when you advocate for somebody else, they advocate for you, and I think that's important.
Well, with that, I will leave it at that. So thank you. I appreciate your time. This has been tremendous, and I'm sure
Love it.
we could have been talking about this stuff for another hour, but I know that you've got some work to get back to.
Appreciate it.
Important work. You know, finding our next generation of construction professionals,
Yes.
and so thank you for your time.
Have a great one.
Thank you.
Bye.